Begin. So I'm Sarah Winkleman. I'm the Director of Education Program and Outreach at JCRC, and I'm really excited that you're all joining us here today. I'm really excited to hear from Louise. I just wanted to let you know how the program's going to play out so that you have a sense of how this hour is going to go. Um, I have you all muted because it just gets too loud if everyone's not muted. And then after Louise talks, there's going to be opportunity to ask questions. So feel free to write any questions you have as we go along in the chat box. And then I'm going to summarize the questions at the end and ask her those after she speaks. So there'll be plenty of time for a question and answer. And then even if people want to stay a little bit after, she's willing to stay on and talk to all of you. So she's really excited to be here. And I think those is all my housekeeping things. So I think we're ready. Mark, do you want to go ahead and
Sure.
welcome everybody and introduce?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So on behalf of JCRC of Greater Washington, I want to thank all of you for joining us for our first ever virtual door-over-door conversations. We are so pleased that over 10 different conversations are taking place this week among hundreds of teens, adults, Holocaust survivors throughout the Greater Washington, D.C. region. For decades, JCRC has had the great honor and true responsibility to organize and host our community-wide Yom HaShoah commemorations. Faced now with an unprecedented public health crisis, we have worked hard to be resourceful and flexible to find alternate means to bridge the physical divides that have been imposed on all of us. Thank you first and foremost to our survivors, and thank you to all of you who are joining us to hear their testimonies and affirm that we will carry on those legacies. In the midst of a global pandemic, we must maintain our obligations to one another and our responsibility to remember. A special toda rabbah to Sarah Winkleman, who you're all looking at, JCRC Director of Education, Program and Services, who coordinated these conversations happening all week. And toda rabbah to all of our wonderful Jewish congregational educators whose partnership made this possible. Louise Lawrence-Israëls is speaking to us today. Louise was born in 1942 in Haarlem, the Netherlands, while the country was already occupied by the Nazis. Her story is truly inspiring. We are going to learn a lot. And at the risk, I hope non-existent, of trivializing that which can never be trivialized, I don't think anybody will be complaining about social isolation when Louise is finished. Let's put it that way. We are truly honored that she has chosen to join us and share her story. Thank you, Louise, and it's such a privilege to turn over that dais to you.
Thank you very much for this very nice introduction. And I'm also very excited to be with everybody in this, what we call a difficult time, but really is not so difficult if you think about it. So you just all heard that my name is Louise Lawrence-Israëls, a very long name. My husband's last name is Lawrence. I'm from the Netherlands. I was born Louise Israëls, and you never lose your maiden name. But having said that, I had no idea what my name was till I was almost 3 years old. The story of my time in hiding is really mostly the story of my parents. And I always say, and I can't say it enough, that I really had very loving and amazing parents, very unselfish. They had 2 little children during the 5 years of occupation. I was only for 3 years, but my brother was for 5 years. And the only thought during all that time, besides being very afraid and worried about their family, they were most worried about their children. And they kept thinking and talking to each other and saying, we have to keep our children safe. And that was their whole theme during all the years of occupation and the last 3 years in hiding. So we were very lucky because my father had very good friends who were not Jewish, who had joined the resistance. And I have to explain something about the resistance. Those were people that were the true heroes during this time of occupation. They knew that helping a Jewish family would put themselves, their lives in danger, and also the lives of their families if they had them. But they figured people need our help. It's not worth it to even think about our lives. We're going to help them. And it's because of them that I can tell you my story. Without them, there was no way that we could have survived. So pretty early on, they figured that with the last name of Israels, we wouldn't be very lucky. And we needed fake identity papers. I, at that time, had no idea, of course, when I started speaking and understanding that you're supposed to have a last name or family name. I just went by the name Maria. I had no idea that my name was Louisa. My parents didn't talk about the years of occupation. They didn't talk during the occupation. They didn't talk about what was happening outside in the beginning, our house, and then the attic where we were hidden. What they wanted is for their children to survive, but for their children to have a normal, if you can call that normal, life and a happy life with two parents. And I am absolutely convinced, now being a grandmother myself, that they really succeeded. So Holland was occupied for 5 years. In the beginning, the occupiers, the Nazis, had to get settled and weren't so focused on Jews. But as soon as they were settled in Holland, had taken over the country and everything that was good in the country, they focused on the rules and regulations against Jewish families and Jews. We were not allowed to have property. Everything that was worth something, you had to hand in. Then you got a receipt and you were told it is just temporary, it's for safekeeping. Well, that was one of the very first lies. Not everybody handed in their gold, their silver, their cash, their stocks, their bonds, their bank books, savings books, copper, tin, bicycles, cameras. Those were all things that Jews were not allowed to have. So some people decided to hide some things in big drums, metal drums in the backyard. My family, my father and his father decided to do that too. First thing they hid was everything that had something to do with being a Jew. That meant prayer books, talit, prayer shawls, kiddush cups, anything that could show somebody coming into your house that we were Jewish. We had a fake name. It was not a very Jewish name. And all those things were hidden. That was number one. Number two, they wanted to hide some ownership papers because they figured if we survived the war, we're going to have to prove that we owned a house and that we owned a business. And then they tried very hard to hide some silver and some cash. Then after everything was handed in voluntarily, as they said, the rules and regulations against Jews became much tighter. My father had a business with his father. It was a textile business. They manufactured clothing, and that was confiscated. So from one moment having a great job and traveling the world and really not wanting for anything, he was on the street with a wife and a son and another child on the way, me, and he could not make a living. So he found a small job in a small Jewish dry cleaning place, and he pressed pants. But Jews were also forbidden to take public transportation. So the dry cleaning place was about 5 miles from home. He had handed in his bicycle, so he had to walk in the morning. And then at night, after 12 hours on his feet, he had to walk back. And he got meager little salary, but he could buy bread and milk for his family. And that was more important than having a great life and doing whatever he wanted to do, like it was before. He always said that he used to go to work singing or whistling, even going home after being so tired, because he knew he was going home and he was able to provide for his family. So you see, everything is always relative. You do what you have to do. Jewish children, and that did not really apply to my brother and I, we were too young, were not allowed to go to a regular school. You could only be taught by Jewish teachers. What was okay in the town where we lived, because we had a fairly nice sized Jewish community, the town of Haarlem, not too far from Amsterdam. But if you lived in the country, there were no Jewish schools, so the children had to be homeschooled. If you were sick, you could only be taken care of by a Jewish doctor or a Jewish dentist. But then come in again the heroes. A doctor takes an oath when he graduates, and he or she is supposed to take care of the sick. So, and when you were forbidden to take care of somebody, that didn't count for them. So by taking care of us anyway, they risked their lives. Even when we were in hiding, we got childhood diseases. We had measles, we had whooping cough, and of course my parents were very much afraid. There's no such thing as penicillin. So through the resistance, through the heroes, they found a pediatrician that was willing to make house calls to people in hiding. So we had actually a pediatrician that came to our hiding place, to a dusty storage attic. By doing that, he risked his life, and he got caught, not just taking care of us, but also of other people. And as punishment, he and his partner were sent to concentration camp Buchenwald, where his partner was killed, and our pediatrician was so badly beaten that he could never practice again after he came back. But those were really the true heroes. So when I was about 6 months old, everything changed. Trains were going, deporting Dutch Jews to concentration camps, I should say killing centers in Poland. And we also got a call or an order that we had to move to Amsterdam. And my father decided it's time to go into hiding. It's too dangerous to live out. So we went into hiding. It was a storage attic that had a small toilet with a little sink with cold running water, but there was no kitchen and no proper bathroom. It was a tiny little window, so not much natural light came in. And there were a few things stored, like a cabinet or cupboard, and broken down couch. There was a table and chairs and nothing else. So my mom brought in a camping stove. If there was anything to cook or water to boil, then that was done on a camping stove. And she brought in 2 oil lamps just in case the electricity would go off. And they brought in mattresses for the adults. And the adults were my mom, my dad, my mom's good friend, she was her age, Selma, whose family had been deported while she was helping my mom, taking care of me. It was a neighbor. So she stayed with us for the duration of the occupation. And then for my brother, they had a mattress. He was 2 years old. And there was a crib for me because I was only 6 months old. We went into that, and my mom brought pots and pans and utensils and whatever she thought she needed. Also, as many warm things like clothing and also blankets as they could carry. When you go into hiding, it's like you're going and you don't exist anymore. So nobody's supposed to know that you're in hiding, but you cannot go in hiding with a moving truck. So everything had to be brought in, and with major help from the heroes that helped my dad move into that attic. So we were brought in, my brother and myself, and my mom and her friend Selma, and the four of us never left the attic for more than 2.5 years. My father did go out occasionally after dark because he needed to make contact with the underground, to the resistance, to try to get food for us, medicine sometimes. And what was very important for the adults was news. We had no access to any news, no newspapers, no telephone, no radio, no, there was nothing. So news could give the adults hope. My brother and I thought that everybody lived in an attic. We never gave it a thought because my parents didn't talk about the outside world. So we thought everybody lived like us. Yes, we were hungry most of the time because there was very little food, but there was always something for the children. Even if there wasn't enough, the adults would go without, but the children would get something every day. We were cold in the winter, and that was also kind of normal for us, except in the last winter, and I will touch on that in a few moments. Then it was so bad, and I remember that really well because it was actually painful. But you probably wonder, what did those parents do with their two little children in an attic with no access to anything else? If you think about your own life, not at the moment, but in normal times, not when we have a pandemic, you can go outside, you can go to school, you can play with your friends, you can go to the movies, you have access to a television, you have access to your computer, you have an iPhone or cell phone, you can play in the parks, you do your sports, all that. We had none of that. So my father had thought about that when we went into hiding, and he took as much scrap paper and pencils and crayons as he could lay his hands on. So after we had breakfast, if there was anything to eat, sometimes breakfast wasn't more than a bowl of warm or lukewarm water. It's a very well-kept secret that if you're hungry and you have no food, if you drink a bowl of warm water, that settles your stomach for a couple of hours and you don't feel that you're hungry. But after breakfast, we used to sit around the table. Of course, first, I was crawling around because I was little. But my brother sat around the table and I saw all that. And they were playing games with him. They were actually teaching him colors, playing games with colors. They were teaching him letters and then small words. They were teaching him numbers and easy math. And it looked like they were having a lot of fun. So I was an early talker and I was also an early walker, and I wanted to sit with them. I wanted to be part of that fun. And my father said that if I was quiet, I could sit with them. So here is a family. My mom and her friend Selma are always sewing something because we were growing. Our clothes had to be mended or fixed. There was always something to sew. That's what they did. And then the three of them, Mom and Selma and my dad, played games with us. It was a form of homeschooling. It's very strange when you think about it. You learn a word, or I mean, you think about when you were young. You learn a word, for instance, the word tree, and you go outside and you right away associate tree with a tree outside. That didn't happen for us. We learned the word tree, but what was a tree? So my mom was a very good drawer. She's actually later on an artist, and she would draw a tree so that we could associate the word with what it actually looked like. Same thing with a bird, with everything else. So when we were liberated, it was still a learning process, but it wasn't as strange as it could have been because we are still in this dark attic. But we got a lot of love from my parents. Their faces were always worried, but we didn't know what that meant. We thought that everybody looked like that. Everything changed just before my second birthday because my father went again outside and he came home with news that only the adults could understand. But he said, it was June 1944, He said it looks like we might be able to survive because the Allied Army, and the Allied Army was Americans, British, Canadians. There was a Jewish brigade from Palestine at that time. Israel didn't exist yet. And some Poles and some other people that were in the England area. And they joined the Allied Army. And they had landed in Normandy. It gave my father hope because every extra day in the attic was an extra day to worry about. We could completely run out of food, or we could be betrayed. There were all kinds of factors that why we couldn't survive, but a shorter time or maybe seeing an end in sight gave them hope. And my father wanted to celebrate that new hope. We as children, when they talked about it, the adults had no idea what he was talking about because, like I said before, we didn't know what was going on in the outside. We just saw that my parents looked a little bit different. So they picked my second birthday to make this big celebration. When you forget your best friend's birthday today, doesn't make any difference in the morning. You can organize everything so you have a great party at night. You make a few calls, you go to the corner bakery, you buy a cake, you do anything and it is fast. That doesn't work that way when you're in hiding. So my father spoke to his friend, part of the resistance, and he explained that he really wanted to make a difference. He wanted to do a party. And my second birthday was coming up. So he asked his friend for some ingredients to make a birthday cake. And he got the ingredients, but I told you we didn't have a kitchen. He baked a birthday cake on top of a camping stove. I don't know how he did it. I can bake, but I need an oven. He made actually a cake. My mom cut up one of her blouses and made by hand a beautiful birthday dress for me. Selma, her friend, made a Raggedy Ann doll for me from old scraps. And my dear brother had one toy the whole time that we were in hiding. That's the only thing that he had been allowed to bring with him when we went into hiding. It was his toy. I was allowed to look at his toy, but I was never allowed to touch it. It was his toy. And he was actually wrapping it for me to give to me on my birthday because he was in on the big secret. His toy was a pull horse, a wooden pull horse that he walked around with. My father's friend gave my dad explained what they were planning and what they were doing. And he gave my father an antique wicker doll's chair. And he said, no, she's going to have her first doll, then she can play house, give her this chair. And he also said, I am coming over, I'm coming to visit you because the 3 people from the resistance occasionally came up to the attic. They were the only ones that knew where we were or where we lived. And I will take a photograph of the birthday girl, because then if she survives, I'll make sure that she has that picture because this is such an important day for your family. That's what he said. He also brought some socks and shoes. I had only walked around on bare feet because by the time I started walking, my mom could not go to a store and buy me shoes. So he brought those. They were like 2 sizes too small, but just for the picture, they were able to squeeze in my feet. So it was a big surprise. They sang happy birthday to me. And I loved all my presents and my new dress. But the best part was my brother's toy. And I thought, finally, it's mine. Till he told me it was just for the day. I had to give it back at night. But that was fine. At least I had it for the day. I was so little that I could actually sit on the doll's chair. So I want to share this picture with you because I have it, and I'll do that in 1 second. But I want you to know that I realized more and more that this picture is a tribute to my parents. Because what you're going to see is a perfectly happy 2-year-old. I'm not any different than if you know a 2-year-old, what a 2-year-old today looks like. And that's because what my parents wanted for my brother and me. So I'll share the picture with you, and I hope I can hold it still and you can see it. Is this okay? Okay. And I'm sitting on the chair. The chair now is at the Holocaust Museum, and occasionally they put it up on display. Because it's very fragile. It was 150 years old when I got it, and it's fragile. So the last winter, so my birthday was in July 1944 when we celebrated this. And the last winter we called the Hunger Winter. It was very unusually cold. Our winter crops were frozen. Most people had actually slaughtered the farm animals because they were hungry. So there was really nothing. It was a time that the thing that we thought was a treat was tulip bulbs too, till we found out that that's not edible. It's poison, and it gave us the most horrible stomach cramps, and then it left us. But it was nice the moment that we ate it. I was so cold, and so was my brother, especially our hands and feet hurt so badly that I'm going to tell you all a very yucky story, but we didn't know it was yucky. So we had a condition that is called chilblains. It still exists today, but you can go to the pharmacy or to the drugstore and buy a cream and put that on your hands and feet, and it takes care of the pain. My dad, the cream was nowhere to be found. So we were crying. That's how much pain we had. My dad remembered that in the 30s, the same thing happened to farmers that were feeding their livestock in the wintertime. They also had chilblains. So very natural, they knew what to do. They put their hands and feet in cow or horse's urine. The uric acid in the urine is what is also in that cream. So what my father made us do at night is pee in a potty, put our hands and feet in our own pee-pee, and the pain went away, and we could go and fall asleep without pain. If they had told us it was disgusting, we probably would have thought it was disgusting. But if nobody tells you that, it's okay. So there are different things that you can do. It's just a matter of how you present it. And that's the same thing today. Not everything is yucky or disgusting, even if we think it is. Anyway, we came through the winter barely, because my father had also baked nutritious cookies in the beginning of the hunger winter with sugar, butter, and flour that he had gotten through the black market from people from the underground. He just bartered everything that he owned. He bartered for food because he had no income. But he had sealed those cookies in tins, and if there was really nothing to eat, then we got part of a cookie. And adults went very often days without food, and then they were so hungry that they finally shared a cookie too. So then came May 1945, and there was a lot of noise on the street. And my father grabbed one of the chairs, pulled it up to the dormer window, and opened the window and looked outside. It's the first time we saw him do that, and we were kind of amazed. What is he doing? And he looked back at us and he said, "I think it's over. I think we might be free." We had no idea what that meant. Miraculously, there was one tin sealed of cookies left. So my father, who was really hungry, ran to the cupboard after he thought we were free. He opened the tin, he stuffed his face, put the tin on the table, and said everybody can take what they want, because he knew as soon as liberation was there, food would trickle in and we would get food. So after one cookie, we were full, and the other cookie that we also grabbed, we put back in the tin. But my brother said, okay, so apparently we're free. That means eating cookies. We had no concept. My parents tried to explain, but it was really hard because we had no concept. I had lived almost my whole life in an attic, and my brother had not really remembered what his life had been before we went to the attic. He was 2 when we went in. My parents waited a couple of days, and then they wanted to make sure that it was safe. And my father said, "We're going outside." We lived across the street from a park, and we're going to go to the park and you can play outside. We had no idea what that meant. But my brother and I, holding on to each other for dear life, really squeezing each other's hand, followed my father 4 flights of stairs downstairs. And then my father opened the front door, and we were blinded by the sunlight. It was a very sunny day, and we were so afraid. Then he took us outside, and we looked left and right, and we had never seen a street. And we thought if you walk to the end of the street, you're going to fall off. We didn't know that one street goes into another street or into a square or something. We thought we would fall off the street, and we were very, very afraid. Of course, we cried. My brother started, and I did everything that he did. So when he started crying, I started crying. And all my brother could say is, if this is what it's like to be free, I don't want to be free. I want to go back upstairs. My parents had no idea what had happened to any of their relatives, their parents, their siblings, or anybody, because there are no communications. But the one thought, I told you that in the beginning, that they had during this whole time, we need to save our children. And then the children don't want it. So they took us back upstairs, explained some more, also explained to me that my real name was Louisa. So from then on, I was not Maria anymore. I became Louisa. And a couple of days later, they said we're going for a walk. So all of Holland had been occupied. For all Dutch people, the stores had nothing. So everybody walks around in raggedy clothes, but everybody is happy it's over. The sun is shining. And also around in Amsterdam, a lot of the Canadian soldiers walked around. They had liberated us. The northern part of Holland was liberated by the Canadian Army. So here are two parents, two crying children, and then two young men in nice uniforms came up to us. We had no idea what they were saying. They spoke English, they were Canadian, but they pulled Hershey bars out of their pockets and gave each, my brother and myself, a Hershey bar. And my mom said we could actually taste it. Now, the first time you taste chocolate, I don't think you'll ever forget. We went back home, we stopped crying. The next morning, when we woke up, my brother jumped off his mattress and screamed, when are we going back outside again? He wanted more Hershey bars. So you see, children, small children, are resilient. They pick up on things that are going on around them, and they are resilient and then learn to adapt to a new life. My parents decided that religion was dangerous. We had no religion when we grew up. They didn't want to talk about it, and they did not tell us that we were Jewish. They also never talked about any of the relatives. Only my father's parents survived. The rest of them were murdered in the death camps in Poland. So they didn't talk about that either. I was 9 years old. I went to a birthday party, and I came home and I told my mom that there were 4 grandparents there. I said, what happened? My friend had 4 grandparents. You're only supposed to have 2. And so my mom said, well, you had at one time also 4 grandparents. So I said, well, what happened? And she would answer, they did not come back. She would not explain what they did not come back from. It's too painful. She couldn't. All her life, she was 99 years old when she passed away. She didn't talk about it. People did not come back. That's the only thing that she actually said. The religious part was also around the time I was 9 years old. Somebody came up to my brother and I, after we had mailed a letter from my mom at the post office, and she said, do your parents have a Christmas tree in their house? And my brother and I looked at each other and she said, oh, good. So you don't have one, and you shouldn't have one because you guys are Jewish. So we came home, and today you would say to your parents, am I from outer space or something? What is that? And my mom said, yeah, wait till your father comes home and we'll explain it. I was a very curious person. I always wanted to know everything. My parents really didn't want to talk about it. I was lucky. My mom's friend Selma became my best friend, and I spent most of my summers with her. So what I couldn't ask my parents, because I knew it was too painful for them, or I would not get a complete answer, I asked my friend Selma. And when I was 15 years old, I actually called a rabbi. We lived in the country. I called a rabbi in Amsterdam and I said, I'm very interested. I know I'm Jewish, but I don't know anything about it. He said, go talk to your parents. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to do that. So I waited another year and I called the rabbi again. He said, talk to your parents. So I figured I'm 16 years old. I'm going to tell my parents. My parents always let their children make up their own mind. They were really very good about that, but they were very sad that I wanted to be part of Judaism. I wanted to embrace that. I realized they were sad about it because they were afraid. They were afraid their whole life that something was going to happen again. And they wanted to safeguard their children. It didn't matter if I was 50 or 60 years old. They still wanted to safeguard us. That was their main thing, main focus in life. The whole country talked about hatred towards everything German. Products, people, country, language, and also in my family. When I had my own family, when my husband is American. He was an American medical student in Amsterdam where we met. And when we had our own children, I still used that same hatred till I had a wake-up call when our 9-year-old middle child did something. And I realized it wasn't what she did, it was what I had done. My husband is Jewish and I went on and embraced the religion and the tradition. And so we brought our children up with religion and tradition. But I said to my husband, we have to change this. We cannot go through life with this hatred, because that's actually how the Holocaust started, in a nutshell, with hatred towards people with a different religion and people that were different. And you know that it wasn't just the Jews that were targeted by the Nazis, it was also the Roma, what we used to call gypsies, mentally and physically handicapped people, Jehovah's Witness, homosexuals, communists, and then of course the largest group were Jews. They were all targeted and deemed inferior by the Nazis. So when you realize that that's all started with hatred, you realize also you wanted to stop. And that's what we did. And we were very lucky that our children were young enough. And I think that we were lucky when we turned this around. During the Holocaust, approximately 12 million people were murdered. Out of those 12 million were 6 million Jews. And out of those 6 million were 1.5 million innocent Jewish children. Never had a chance in life, did not done anything wrong, but they were born Jewish. And people let it happen. If anybody ever tells you that people didn't know what was going on, maybe in the beginning, but it went on for many years and people knew it and they were indifferent. Today, I talk, and a lot of my fellow survivors talk. We have a large group at the United States Holocaust Museum where we volunteer, and we talk because we want our children and grandchildren to have a better life without hatred. It's a very tall order because there's still so much hatred going on in the world. If you look at what happened in the last 20, 30 years, 1992, genocide in Bosnia, 1994 in Rwanda, then the 21st century, Darfur region of Sudan in Africa, lots of other countries in Africa, and look what's happening today in the Middle East. People are targeted because of their religion, because of the way they dress, the way they speak. We cannot let that happen. We have to speak up against hatred. That's really my message. I'm looking at my watch and I'm seeing that I kind of went over a little bit, and I want to give you a chance to ask questions. And I want you to know that every question is a good question, and I'll be very happy to answer. So if that's all right, I'd like to open it for questions, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Louise. Thank you so much. What a tribute for us to be, such an honor for us to hear from you, and a tribute to your family that you're able to share the story, and so appropriate on this day, Yom HaShoah. And I think for many of us, the pandemic, this helps put things in perspective for us. So thank you for taking the time. So there are.
Yeah, if I can say that, I have one last thing to say about the position that everybody is in now. You know, I told you that my parents kept us safe. It's our obligation, all of us, not just one person or two people, but we have to keep each other safe. That is so important. And if we do that, we will get through this, and we'll get through it faster.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so there are some questions that I want to be sure to share. So one of the questions was, what happened to your brother after the war? Did he also come to the U.S.? And I'll add, that was the question they asked. But I also want to ask if anyone else identified Jewishly after the war, like your brother.
No, my brother doesn't. My whole family stayed in Holland. I'm the only one that came to America because I'm married to an American. And my brother lives in Amsterdam, and he is retired. He became an oncologist, and he does not want to talk about it. My father started talking about 6 years before he passed away, because I told him at that time that I was going to start volunteering at the Holocaust Museum. That was 1994. And I thought that he would be very upset about that. So I told him, and he said, it's a good thing that you're doing that. If we don't talk now, there will come a time that people say it didn't happen. And that's one of the reasons that I think it's so important, as long as we're still here and capable, that we speak.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing. So also the question was about, well, there's a few different ones here, is that in terms of how did your parents keep you guys quiet as kids when people, so you weren't detected? Although
Right,
so you were on the 4th floor, so.
Yes, we were in a storage attic on top of a set of Amsterdam row houses. And we weren't really quiet. But if parents speak softly to their children, the children mimic what they hear. We were never yelled at. But I am sure that the people that lived in the apartment below us heard us. They must have been really good Dutch people. They didn't run to the Gestapo and said, we hear footsteps upstairs, didn't say a word. They also didn't help us or know us. We had our own flights of stairs going up. So they never really met us, but help had to come from further away. Because if they had known us and a collaborator or a German person, a Nazi had rang their doorbell and asked, is there anybody living in that attic? They could actually honestly say, we don't know. No, it's a storage attic. Had they known us, they would have had to lie about it. So in that case, we were very, very lucky.
And it sounded like there were a number of people that helped you. I mean, I know a lot of people didn't, but there were the people in the resistance, and there was the doctor that came.
Yeah, he came through the resistance.
Were you in touch with any of those people, any relationship with those people afterwards?
My parents were, but Dutch people are funny people. When my father my father got back on his feet and he started making a living, he wanted to do special things for two of these people that became very, very good, stayed very good friends. They thought that was ridiculous. They said, that's what you do for another person and we don't want to thank you. And of course, they're not alive anymore because they would have been 110. But the people in Holland that were part of the underground or resistance in general, if they were honored by Yad Vashem as righteous amongst the nations, it was much later because they didn't want it. They thought that was a thing that you do for your fellow human being that were in trouble or needed help.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
and then I guess this is sort of my question, but I'm going to combine it with some of the other questions that other people ask. Is how much of this do you remember, and how much is this what it sounds like Selma's the one that told you your story?
Yeah, and I talked a lot to my father in his last six, but like I said before, I can talk for 5 hours because there's lots and lots of stories, and we were betrayed. What was very scary, and I remember that because I was already 2 years old, and but our papers were so good. They did take my dad because my dad's papers were not as good as our papers. My mom's papers were, but my dad was able to escape. That was towards the end, just before we were liberated. I remember very well from my second birthday on. I have photographic memory, and that's not always a blessing, but I remember. I can pull that out of my brain, and it's like a film. Of course, the very first, when I was crawling and all that, I do not remember. And there's certain details I remember. And then I did ask my friend Selma. I said, I'm thinking about something. Is that true or not? And she put it in perspective for me.
Okay, so you just alluded to the question someone asked about, was there ever a time in the 5 years that your family was in danger?
Yes. Well, we were always in danger. So because you didn't know, if my father went out to try to get some food and he had to go back, what if he was followed? So at one time, he actually, while he was out, and it was during the day because he needed medicine, it was not something that could wait. Somebody pulled him and put him into a portico and stood in front of him. And my father was scared to death. He thought, this is it. He heard a lot of footsteps. So apparently this was a Dutch policeman who saw him, and he looked like a scary guy in dark clothing. And he actually shielded him because there was a roundup in the area, but my father didn't know. So that was one thing for him, but twice somebody came to our attic and did a lot of screaming, and my brother and I were in a corner and held on to each other for dear life and scared to death. And they did ask us what our names were. And like I said before, I didn't know my name till I was, liberated. So we said Maria, and my brother told his name. And that was exactly what was on the fake identity paper. So they left us alone. Not my dad. So my dad was lucky. He knew Amsterdam very well, and he escaped. And at that time also, the deportations from Holland had stopped. The railroad tracks were bombed, and the Nazis were focusing on the huge deportations from Hungary. What happened, started in 1944. And September 1944, were no more deportations from Holland to the death camps in Poland.
Okay. And then, so was your family Dutch for generations? Like how many?
Yes. We can trace back almost 500 years.
Wow. Were those the first Jews to come?
Well, during the Inquisition, there were a lot of Sephardic Jews. So we have some Sephardic Jews in our family, but most of ours were not Sephardic. They were Ashkenazic, and they came from the East. And they settled in Holland, and most of them in the northern part of Holland, the colder area, where they were in cattle feed and cattle and trade. I think my great-grandfather had a horse and buggy and went by the farmers selling his stuff because there were no stores at that time.
Wow. And in general, would you say do you have a sense of whether there was anti-Semitism among the Dutch during that time, or they were just forced to do it by the Germans? Like, do you have a sense of?
Holland was one of the most tolerant countries. The Jews for maybe 200 years had lived free. You could choose your own profession. There was no problem. Even after the war, I think anti-Semitism started really during the Gulf War because of all the oil. And people realized that maybe they had to embrace somebody else. But Holland really, as Jews, people were not afraid.
Right. Wow. Okay, that's good to hear. It's sort of what I've heard. I didn't. So also, yeah. Wait, there was another question I'm missing here. Oh, so you're a child survivor, which I know comes with a lot of whatever that means, and it sort of changed over time. So the question was sort of, when did you start telling your story or the story of your family, and how was that for you?
Okay, so I already mentioned that I started volunteering at the Holocaust Museum when the museum was barely open a year, and I started translating.
Remind me, when did it open?
It opened in April 1993. So I started in spring 94, just after we moved. My husband retired from the military and we moved to this area. So I started translating documents from French, Dutch, and German into English when all these archives opened up and the Holocaust Museum tried to assemble as many documents as they could. And I never really spoke for the first 2 or 3 years. And then one of the older survivors who was in a camp at one time asked me if I had a mouth. And I looked at her and I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Well, if you have a mouth, then start talking." I said, "Well, what do I have to say? I was a child. I was not in a camp." And she said, "Every survivor's story is a part of the puzzle. And you have to help, make that puzzle." And that's when I started. And I haven't stopped since.
That's beautiful, beautiful. And when did you start to understand the scope of the Holocaust as a kid, and when did you start telling to your children?
Right. So as a kid, I didn't know. I know that we were different. Everything was scarce, but it was in the whole country. The whole country had to be rebuilt. So everybody was in the same shoes. Nobody talked. And if you wanted to talk, people said, "Come on, it's over. Let's just continue." So I was a physical therapist in Amsterdam. And my afternoons were my specialty at working with children with cerebral palsy. And in the mornings, a lot of my patients were Holocaust survivors that came from the camps. And they talked. Nobody else talked, but they talked. So I started to learn about it. And I got very interested and I wanted to know more. Even my friend Selma, who was the only one out of 7 children and a whole family, grandparents and aunts and uncles, nobody survived, but she wouldn't talk about it either. She would answer some questions, but she wouldn't talk. So I learned more and more. But when I started volunteering at the Holocaust Museum, I thought I knew a lot. And I realized that I did not even know more than a square millimeter. I learned something every day, every day. Everybody has a different story to tell, and you learn.
So your family and your family friends after the Holocaust it was not other Jewish families that had also survived? It was a more random.
Yes, there were. But, and we even my parents brought us up, the grammar school that we went to was a Montessori system because everybody is on a different level. And I was 3 years old and I told you all we did was homeschooling. I could read a book. I didn't know how to socialize with other people, so I wasn't so up to with everything. But in a Montessori system, you can learn that. We had 2 boys that were living in an orphanage and they were a kippah. Nobody ever answered. Nobody even asked that. Why are you wearing a kippah and where are your parents? Nobody talked about it. I learned so much, much, much later. And then I went to a service and a reconstructionist service in Amsterdam with my sister because my parents had 3 more siblings after the war. And we, maybe this is 9 years ago. And it was a funny, emotional service on a Friday night because almost all of the people were child survivors. I had no idea of the scope of child survival, how many people actually survived. And they all survived because they had exceptional parents and there were people that risked their lives to save them or hide them.
I wonder, I assume there was a higher percentage of Dutch children that were saved than other countries.
Holland has the highest percentage-wise, not number-wise, of Jews that were deported to the death camps. But for instance, there was a student organization in Amsterdam and they were able to save 400 children. And you can say, well, what is 400? 400 children saved is 400 children saved. So I think percentage-wise, the most were murdered in all of Europe.
Okay, so I think I got most of the questions in the chat box. I know a lot of people thank you for taking the time to share your story, and then it's important for all of us to hear and how much we appreciate it. If I didn't get to your question, you want to shoot me another chat? If not, I'm gonna.
Okay, while you're looking at that, I will tell something else that nobody asked, apparently. My friend Selma, who was the only survivor of a very large, very Orthodox Jewish family, who did not like to stay in Holland. She felt that her family was betrayed and she didn't really trust people. But she got married after the war and her husband wanted to stay in Holland. She had wanted to move to Israel as soon as the state was proclaimed. So when Selma's husband passed away, she was 80 and she made Aliyah. She went to Israel. She learned to speak Hebrew and she had 11 glorious years in Israel and loved every bit of it and finally felt safe.
Wow, beautiful. Okay, well, don't worry, I got a few more questions.
Good.
Did she end up married and having children too, or?
Selma got married and she and her husband had lost his father and he had been in hiding in the southern part of Holland. His father was murdered in Auschwitz and his mom had come back. So they decided not to have children of their own and they adopted 2 Jewish war orphans. They gave them a home and they became their parents.
Yeah. Okay, so I got a couple light questions and a couple heavier questions. First of all, I just want to read this one note about thank you for sharing your story. This is from Samuel. As a grandchild of a survivor, it brings me closer to my grandfather hearing your story. So that's a nice note. And then this is really funny. I missed this one the first time she asked, is what did you think of chocolate? What was your first impression of chocolate?
Amazing. Delicious. I still love chocolate. Right.
Well, there's nothing to not like about chocolate. And then when did you first tell your husband that you survived the Holocaust?
We talked from the moment I met him. So when he was still a student when we met, so we got married in Holland, and then we had 2 more years of married life till he graduated medical school there, and we talked a lot about it. But I didn't want to make that a big deal. You know, we started our family and I did not want to. That was one of the reasons my parents didn't talk, because they didn't want to burden us with their grief. If they talked about it, they would have to talk about their relatives and about everything else. Towards the end of the war, my mom had another baby that did not survive because there was nobody to take care of him when he needed help. So he was actually buried at night, in the middle of the night, in a park. And my parents couldn't talk about it. I did not find out that I had another brother till my father was buried 21 years ago. I had no idea. So that's how strong they felt. But my husband and I talked. But I went on with my hatred towards everything German, and I used derogatory words, just like I was brought up with. And it's a time in my life that I'm not very proud of. I should have realized what I was doing, especially when we had children. And I'm really very grateful to my husband and some help that we had, that we were able to turn that around.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. There are a few. Well, you know what? There are a couple more questions. Well, I'm gonna ask you one more, and then what we're gonna do is stop the questions and end this, and then if you can stay on a few more minutes, and if a few people want to stay on and talk, they can do that. But so does your hiding place still exist?
Yeah, it's a set of row houses. I've showed them to my children, and I've taken pictures of it. I don't have one right here, right now. But it's that whole set of row houses is as old as Amsterdam. It's 700 years old. So they spruce it up and they paint the woodwork, and it still exists.
Still exists. Amazing. Oh, I'm sorry. There is one.
I've never been in it.
Oh, you haven't gone?
Again, no. It's part now of the apartment that is underneath it. So I've never been back in it, but I've shown our children where we were hidden.
Because someone else asked that there's certain things that you don't do today because of your experience from the Holocaust, that certain things you can't tolerate, or PTSD, or.
Well, I cannot tolerate intolerance. I'm very upset with a lot of things that are going on today. That is upsetting. Anti-Semitism is upsetting. Intolerance towards religion is very upsetting. And it doesn't matter to me what religion, as long as we're tolerant of each other. I cannot throw away food unless it's molded. We eat everything that I have in the house because I think it's terrible. It was so hard for my parents to feed us and to keep us alive with enough food that I cannot throw anything out. I keep cash in the house. My kids call me a war baby because what if something happens and you cannot use your credit card? So you have to be prepared. And the other thing that I don't do ever anymore, I have usually a pendant on, and the Mogen David is on the inside. I will never go outside with a Mogen David anymore because I'm actually like my parents today. I'm afraid. I'm very much afraid because of what's happening around us.
Well, I don't want to end on a depressing note, but I do want to thank you for sharing your story and to say that it was, I mean, you really gave us a perspective for us to think about now, but also this message of love, like not hate, that hate is not a good thing, I think is really important. I know we have a number of different teams from different youth group, different religious schools that are on this call today. So I really am glad they all joined us and got to hear your story, and that we now have an obligation to carry on the legacy. So thank you so much for sharing. And again, people can unmute themselves and stay on and talk for a few minutes if they want, but this is concluding the formal part of our program. So,
thank you.
Thank you. If you want to say something, I'm going to have you unmute yourself because I think we were getting everyone's side conversation. I think, Louise, you're unmuted. Did anybody, I don't know.
Unmute? Oh, great, fine.
You're unmuted. Did anybody, all right. You messaged me, I can unmute you if you had any questions. Does anybody want to ask her something? Wait, someone's saying something. Mark does. Okay, come on,
Sure.
Mark.
Okay, so first I want to thank Louise so much for everything she said, and just to take note of her feelings about the current situation and her apprehensions. And I just want to say on behalf of JCRC that it's our mission that every Jew in the area should feel less afraid. That is why we are here. And it's so poignant that you would feel comfortable to mention your fear in our midst. So we thank you.
Thank you.
I simply want to say publicly how moving it was to hear you, Louise. I know you well. We child survivors all have very important stories to be told. All the stories have to be told. And stories do have a conclusion. Louise has her conclusion. Mine, some people heard earlier.
Claude, just back up a little so we can hear you. It's muffling again.
I've forgotten.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Thank you so much, Louise. I'm also a child survivor. I don't mean to take over. It's wonderful to hear Louise at the end saying she has no hate. Hate is bad. I personally, as a child survivor, have anger at the fact that somehow there's no way to stop genocide. And genocide keeps on There's a wonderful story. Elie Wiesel told Bill Clinton do something about Surfer and Bika, and Clinton did, and it stopped. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Claude. Does anybody else want to ask any other questions? I think you can unmute yourself. Wave if you can. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you staying. Wait, there's one more chat in the chat box. Oh, no more questions. Okay, thank you all. Have a good night.
Stay safe. Yep.